much is your time worth? Whether you're a realtor, lawyer, accountant, or even a content creator, Stamps.com gives you the chance to focus your time on what you do best. Don't waste your time mailing letters or shipping packages. Stamps is there to help. Print stamps, shipping labels, or certified mail forms in seconds. Get up to 89% off USPS, UPS, and other carriers, and schedule free package pickups all from one place. Stamps.com also makes it easy to track shipments, manage contacts, and report on how much you send and spend. Over the last 28 years, more than 4 million customers have relied on Stamps.com to make their lives easier. Don't waste time worrying about being a postage expert or standing in line to drop off letters and packages. Let Stamps.com do what they do best so you can do what you do better. Go to Stamps.com/audio to sign up for a special offer. No contract, cancel anytime. That's Stamps.com/audio.
I'm Jamie Beebe.
And I'm Jake Deptula. We're the hosts of the Strictly Stalking podcast.
Strictly Stalking is a true crime podcast exploring stalking stories told by the survivors in their own words.
Join us every Tuesday as we interview survivors, advocates, and experts to give you a deep dive into the workings of a true stalking case.
Hear from these survivors as they describe how they fought back, got justice, and lived to tell their story.
Stalking is a crime that can happen to anyone for any reason at any time. Is someone watching you, listening to you, following you, or even hiding in your house? It can happen to you.
Would you know where to turn if you or someone you know has a stalker? We'll give you the resources you need to get help if you're a victim of a stalker.
Find Strictly Stalking wherever you listen to podcasts from Podcast One.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 260 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what are you up to, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well.
Yeah?
You and I are trying to get a bunch of stuff done so that we can go to CrimeCon.
Yeah, Vegas, man.
Vegas. You know what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Well, I know the money I take out there will stay in Vegas.
It will. That too.
Just being honest.
So I do want to throw it out there for anybody that's going to CrimeCon. A little different this year. They don't have set times for us to be on Podcast Row. It's kind of an all day thing. And then we just pick like a 2-hour period each day where we're going to be on there. So my thought is, if you're not on our Twitter or Instagram page, probably should go ahead and subscribe, because we'll put it out there when we're going to be on Podcast Row. I don't want anybody to miss it if they want to come see us, if they want to talk to us. But I don't know, Gibbs, any other way to do it but to put it out ahead of time that, okay, on Friday, we're going to be there from this time to this time, Saturday, Sunday, all of that. And that's probably the best place. I'll put it on Instagram and Twitter.
That works.
Gibbs, let's go ahead and give our shout outs. For Patreon, we had Leanna.
Hey, Leanna.
Sarah Wilson.
What's going on, Sarah?
Seizure Salad.
Hey, Salad.
Lance Holman.
Well, appreciate that, Lance.
Wayne Carlson.
What's going on, Wayne?
Shell Waite.
Well, thanks, Shell.
Ben Woods.
What's going on, Ben?
Troy Lee.
Hey, thanks, Troy.
Tanisha Williams.
Well, good old Tanisha.
Emily Ernst.
Hey, Emily.
Irina Nikitovich.
Nikitovich.
Belinda Roski.
Hey, Belinda.
Taylor D'Angelo.
Hey, D'Angelo.
Meg Lewis.
Thank you, Meg.
Brittany Tellez.
Hey, Brittany.
And last but not least, Danny Mullins.
There's Danny.
So that's a lot of great news support. If we go back into the vault, Gibbs, this week we selected Kimber Monks.
Hey, thanks, Kimber.
So we appreciate all the people that support us on Patreon month after month. For PayPal, we had donations from Kathy Snyder.
Hi, Kathy.
Jennifer Aylman.
Hey, thanks, Jennifer.
And David Rhodes.
Hey, David.
So thanks to all of you. Gibbs, we have an episode right now on True Crime All the Time. We're talking about Reverend Thomas Bird. So, in this one, we have a reverend who's having an affair. His wife ends up dead. He says he didn't have anything to do with it.
What me?
But the courts don't agree. But it's an interesting episode. Make sure you check that out. All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am ready.
We are headed back in time a ways to West Virginia to talk about the disappearance of the Sodder children. On December 24th, 1945, a fire destroyed the Sodder family's home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George Sodder, Jennie Sodder, and 4 of their children made it out in time. George and Jennie were devastated to lose 5 of their children in the fire, but that devastation turned into shock and confusion when they couldn't find the remains in the wreckage. Over 70 years later, no one knows what happened to the Sodder children. George Sodder was born Giorgio Sodder in Tula, Sardinia, in November 1895. He moved to the U.S. in 1908 when he was 13 years old. His brother took him to Ellis Island, but returned home, leaving George alone in a new country.
Man, that had to be weird, right? You get all the way here to New York, and your brother says, okay, good luck. I'm headed back to the old country.
At 13 years old,
Yeah.
you're dropped off in New York City by yourself. Hey, figure it out, man.
Yeah.
And, many people did. It's kind of amazing. George began working on the railroads in Pennsylvania, carrying water and supplies to laborers. A few years later, he moved to Smithers, West Virginia, where he worked as a driver. George realized people needed to get goods from the railroads to their houses. So he started a trucking business to deliver supplies from the railroads.
Smart.
He hauled dirt for construction and then later freight and coal. He also ended up owning a few coal mines. He was devastated when one of his employees died in an accident. And that's when he sold his mines and focused exclusively on trucking. And to me, Gibbs, these kinds of stories are fascinating. We just mentioned this kid's dropped off in a foreign land at the age of 13, but he worked hard. And, he made a very good life for himself. Many people did after coming over.
Impressive.
One day, George walked into the Music Box, a local store, and met Jennie Cipriani, the store owner's daughter. She had moved to the U.S. from Italy when she was 3. George and Jennie married, and they had 10 children. Between 1923 and 1943, they settled down in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a town with a small but active Italian community. The Sodders lived in a 2-story frame home 2 miles north of Fayetteville. By 1945, 9 of the Sodder children lived in the home with their parents. They were 23-year-old John, 17-year-old Marion, 16-year-old George Jr., 14-year-old Maurice, 12-year-old Martha, 9-year-old Louis, 8-year-old Jenny, 5-year-old Betty, and 2-year-old Sylvia. One of the Sodder children was in the Army and didn't live at home.
Now, that's a full house.
That is a very full house. And, obviously 10 children, that's a lot. It's a big family. But as I was, going through the names and reading the ages, it kind of hit me. Some of these ages are very close together. And I kind of think about, myself having 2 daughters who are almost out of the house. I just can't imagine, having a child every year, every 2 years. I'd love to have a big family, but man, you talk about expensive, and we all know it's a lot of work to raise a family.
It's a lot of food, man. That's a big grocery bill.
That's a big grocery bill. Today, Gibbs, with the economy and the price of food, the way it's going up, whew, man, we can barely afford to feed ourselves.
Certainly couldn't DoorDash that family.
No, absolutely not. George Sodder was very outspoken and known to give his opinions on business, current events, and politics. The only thing he wasn't open about was why he left Italy. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, a county magistrate described the Sodders as one of the most respected middle-class families around. But the Sodders lived a normal life like everyone else in their community. In December 1945, The family prepared to celebrate Christmas. On December 23rd, Marion Sodder gave her younger siblings new toys she got from her job at the dime store. At 10 p.m., the children opened up their presents. They begged Jennie to let them stay up and play. Jennie agreed and reminded Louis and Maurice to feed the cows and close the chicken coop before they went to sleep.
Why not let them stay up and play, right? I always did that with my kids.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let them stay up, let them have a little fun. But there was accountability. There were chores. There were things that had to be done. Stay up, but before you go to bed, you better do this, this, and this, and this.
Yeah.
Kids were expected to do certain things. I'm not saying they're not today. They are. But by and large, let's face it, kids have it a little easier when it comes to the amount of work they have to do versus early 1900s, life on the farm, getting up and milking cows and, tending to things around there.
I think that's a fair assessment.
I think most people would agree with that. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of parents who make their kids do a ton of stuff. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. John and George Jr. had already gone to sleep in the attic. They had worked all day with their dad. They were tired. George Sr. was also asleep in bed. Jennie and Sylvia went to bed, leaving the other kids in the living room to play. By 12:30 a.m. on December 24th, everyone was asleep. Jennie was woken up by the phone ringing. She thought it was pretty unusual to be getting a call in the middle of the night, but quickly went to answer it so that the noise wouldn't wake anyone else up. When she answered the phone, she heard a woman whose voice she didn't recognize, asking to speak to someone she didn't know. She also heard raucous laughter and glasses clinking in the background. She told the woman, "You have the wrong number," and then hung up the phone. As Jennie made her way back to bed, she noticed that the downstairs lights were on, the curtains were open, and the front door was unlocked. Marion was sleeping on the sofa. Jennie assumed that her other children were upstairs in their rooms, so she turned off the lights, closed the curtains, locked the door, and went back to bed. But just as she was falling asleep, she heard a loud bang on the roof and what was described as a rolling noise.
Probably sound a little spooky.
I would think so. Everyone slept peacefully for the next 30 minutes. And then at 1 a.m., a fire started. Jennie woke up from the smell of smoke filling up the bedroom. She woke George up, grabbed Sylvia, woke Marion up. She went to the stairway and shouted at the kids to wake up. George and John ran downstairs. John yelled over to the other bedroom. He thought he heard voices answer. He and George tried to put out the fire, but the flames were spreading too rapidly. George, Jennie, Sylvia, Marion, John, and George Jr. managed to escape the house. But they weren't unscathed. John and George Jr. burned their hair trying to escape the bedroom, and Gibbs' 5 of the children were still trapped on the second floor. At a certain point, George realized that Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty were still in the upstairs bedrooms.
I mean, as a parent or just a family member, the stress, the anxiety of knowing that, I don't know how you deal with that.
Well, we talked about it, right? This is a very big family. You got a lot of kids to account for in an emergency situation. And I do agree with you. I think the realization on the part of George that, oh my gosh, 5 of my kids are still trapped on the second floor. What am I going to do? Well, he's going to go after them.
Sure.
Like any parent would. George broke a window to get back into the house to get to the kids. In the process, he cut his arm pretty badly. There was so much smoke and fire in the lower level that he really couldn't see much. And the entire staircase was engulfed in flames.
You probably felt defeated at that point.
Well, to the point of, how am I going to get to the second floor? I can't walk through fire.
Right.
So what he decided to do was run outside and get the ladder that he always kept propped up against the house. He planned to use that to access the upstairs bedroom windows, but he was horrified when he saw that his ladder was missing.
So I'm sure he's freaking out. I would be freaking out at this point.
I think anybody would. The one thing that kind of jumped out at me is, and it's not the first time I've heard this, people just keeping a ladder propped up against their house. I don't know that they worried about bad people using it to access like the upstairs or get through a window. I'm not sure people in West Virginia in 1945 probably really thought about that all that much. It wasn't like at the top of their concern list.
Right.
So you mentioned it. He's got to be panicking at this point, but he was trying to keep as calm as he could. George decided he would drive one of his coal trucks up to the house and climb it to reach the windows. But here's where things went wrong again. The day before, the trucks worked perfectly. He had no issues with any of them, but he couldn't start either of the trucks that he had.
It's almost like everything is against him at this moment.
Yeah, he's coming up with great ideas, but he's being thwarted at every turn. Now, you could call that bad luck, or you could read into it that maybe someone's gone out of their way.
Yeah.
To make things harder for him and for the family. When George went to retrieve water from the rain barrel, he found that it was frozen solid. So Marion ran to a neighbor's home to call the fire department, but she couldn't get an operator to respond. Obviously, Gibbs, this is a much different time period.
Yeah.
There is no 911. There is no 24-hour operator of that kind. She's just trying to reach the normal operator who you have to use, I think, at that point, right, to make any call. They have to connect you. Everybody's seen the old clips of them. Didn't you say somebody in your family used to do that?
My mom.
Your mom did that back in the day, right?
She did.
My assumption is, okay, that person's got to take a break. They got to go to the bathroom at some point. So you can't get somebody. You just can't make a call. You got to try again later. Another neighbor saw the fire from a nearby tavern and tried to call the fire department, but no operator responded. So the neighbor drove into town and found the fire chief, F.J. Morris. Morris initiated what was called the phone tree system. And I think a lot of us have been involved in a phone tree over the years. You don't hear about it as much anymore. Now they have those one call now type systems.
Right.
But basically he called one firefighter, that firefighter would call another, that person would call another, and so on and so on. You and I, not all that long ago, had a system at work.
We did.
That kind of worked that same way.
Like someone would call you, you'd have to call one person, but yet when I got the call, I had to call 10 people. It didn't really work in my favor.
And you called nobody, and so the system failed miserably.
Yeah, we didn't need to bring that part up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
As reported in the Smithsonian Magazine, the Fayetteville Fire Department was just 2 miles away from the Sodder home, but they didn't arrive until 8 a.m. And by that point, Gibbs, the home was reduced to a smoking pile of ash. That's the way the Smithsonian characterized it. All that remained of the house was the basement.
Well, that phone tree log thing takes a while to get everybody called and, meet up out at the volunteer firehouse and then get to the property. It takes some time.
That could have been part of the problem. George and Jennie were devastated and believed they had just lost 5 of their children. The initial search was pretty brief because of the holiday. The fire department claimed they found a few bones and pieces of organs. The UP reported that the bodies were burned beyond recognition, but this turned out to not actually be true. The Beckley Post-Herald wrote in their 15-year anniversary article that few, if any, remains were found in the house. Conflicting stories have arisen out of the incident, and it is not known exactly what was taken out of the fire. But it is known that no large remains were found. So I think that's a very interesting contradiction. You have the fire department saying, yep, we found some bones. We found pieces of organs.
Yeah.
And then you have this article written years later saying, no, that's not true.
Yeah, and we're going to hear a lot of conflicting information.
Well, it doesn't surprise me, right? With a case this old. The Sodders and the police were shocked when they couldn't find any remains after searching the property on December 25th, Chief Morris said that the fire may have been hot enough to cremate the bodies completely. He told the family not to disturb the site. They would come back to do a more thorough inspection later. On Christmas Day, a coroner's jury impaneled at the scene and declared the children dead.
But what else are they going to do? There was a large fire. The kids were known to be in the house at the time.
No one saw them come out,
right?
Obviously.
So your only logical response would be to say, yeah, they're dead.
A state police inspector determined the fire was caused by faulty wiring. There were high winds that night, which accounted for how quickly the fire spread. George's missing ladder was found down an embankment more than 75 feet away from the house.
Well, that's strange, right? I mean, high wind can move some things around. I can't imagine high winds moving a ladder 75 feet away from the house.
Or a tornado, but if you're just talking high winds, what we think of to be high winds, I would say no. On December 29th, George covered the basement with 5 feet of dirt. He planned to preserve the site as a memorial for his children. He and Jennie planted flowers where their house once stood. That's 4 days later.
Yeah.
But I get it. You're grieving. To lose 5 children, to lose one child is heartbreaking. To lose 5 of your children at the same time, I mean, you're talking complete devastation. The coroner's office issued 5 death certificates before the end of the year, listing the causes of death as fire or suffocation. True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Sure, while you're listening to me and Gibby talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now, getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. Fresh from San Diego, California, comes the only sunglasses brand that I'm ever going to wear again. I'm talking about Blenders Eyewear, and I know you're going to be just as hooked as I am when you see how awesome these shades are. I got a pair of the Tipsy Goat sunglasses. They're amazing. They're perfect when I'm on the water fishing. I also got a great pair of blue light readers to help me when I'm researching for the podcast. Chase Fisher started Blenders by selling his beachy shades out of a backpack while doubling as a surf instructor on Pacific Beach. He wanted to create mid-priced eyewear with the same cool factor as other leading styles. But unlike expensive big brand shades that you've probably lost or broken, Blenders are actually affordable. Blenders' team of in-house designers are constantly coming out with new styles. And it's not just their sunglasses. Blenders has prescription glasses, readers, and blue lights, as well as a snow collection with goggles and accessories. Live life in forward motion with Blenders today. To score 15% off your Blenders purchase, visit blenderseyewear.com and enter promo code TCATVIP. That's blenderseyewear.com, code TCATVIP for 15% off. Blenders, rocked with pride worldwide. Cerebral is an online mental health service that offers prescription medication, counseling, and therapy for anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, and more. Cerebral is one of the few services that provides prescription medication online through a licensed provider and ships that medication straight to your door so that you can skip the pharmacy lines. They also have a great mobile app, which makes it like you have your personal care team with you wherever you are. Connect with your counselor and therapist on your own schedule through your laptop or through the Cerebral mobile app. You can schedule sessions based on what's most convenient for you, and you don't have to wait weeks to be seen. 80% of members see a provider within 5 days. And because you can do the sessions on a laptop or your phone, you can find an area of your home where you feel the most comfortable. They have affordable treatments that are about 1/3 the price of traditional therapy. And treatment options are available with or without insurance. And for listeners of this program, you can receive 65% off your first month of medication management and care counseling at Cerebral.com/unsolved. Go to Cerebral.com/unsolved for 65% off your first month. That's just a total of $30 to get started. Join Cerebral today on their mission to make quality mental health care accessible and affordable for all. As George and Jennie processed their grief, they began to remember strange events that occurred before the fire. In the fall of 1945, a stranger showed up at their house asking to work for George. He walked to the back of the house and pointed to 2 fuse boxes. He said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." George thought that this guy's comment was odd. He had just had the wiring of the home checked by the power company, who determined it was working fine. Shortly after this incident, a man tried to sell George and Jennie life insurance. And this guy got angry when George refused. And the guy told George, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini."
So it gets a little more interesting.
Well, yeah, that got out of control quickly. I get it, right? You're a life insurance salesman. Some of that is doom and gloom. This is why you need life insurance. This could happen. This could happen. You need to make sure that, your family is protected. But to say that your whole house is going to go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed, I don't think they put that in the average salesperson manual.
No, I don't think that's in your talking points.
No.
Well, I'm sure he's not making a whole lot of sales, is he? If that's how he communicates to his prospects.
I don't think it's a great tactic.
And then to bring Mussolini into it, it's now you're getting into what, politics here?
Yeah, and George was outspoken about how much he disliked Mussolini. Occasionally he argued with other Italians in Fayetteville about his views, but George didn't take the man's threats seriously at the time. And we've already talked about it, Gibbs, right? George was an outspoken person on a number of subjects.
Yes.
When you're outspoken, you're going to have critics. You're going to have people who are going to want to argue with you. Fights are going to ensue.
Yeah,
It's just how it goes.
You're not going to have, not everybody's going to be your friend.
No.
But I like a person that stands up for what they believe in.
No, I do too. But I think back then, like it is today, politics is a very hot button topic. You start talking about politics, the next thing you know, you're in a heated argument. You can lose friends over it. Yeah. You can alienate family members. It's one of the main reasons why you and I have gone out of our way in the 5+ years we've been doing this podcast to stay away from politics. There's no way to win. You are going to tick somebody off.
Sure. And I'm always right anyway.
Well, that's true. And I don't want to have to try to argue with you and your Mensa level intelligence because I'll just look bad.
Yeah, and you just won't get it.
No, I don't understand half of what you say anyway.
Yeah.
It just goes right over my head. George and Jennie recalled that just before Christmas, their older sons noticed a man parked along Highway 21 watching the younger children come home from school.
Okay, creepy.
That is creepy. I've experienced that myself. Obviously, I'm in more of a neighborhood type situation with a lot of houses, but every now and then there'll just be a car parked with somebody sitting in it. I don't always assume they're watching my kids get off the bus, but in the back of your mind, it's there.
Oh, for sure. Like, why are you sitting there?
Yeah, this person doesn't live right around me. I know that much at least. Now, They could be just stopped trying to figure out where they're going.
Right.
And it could be totally innocent. It doesn't stop me, especially from, thinking, got to keep an eye on this person just to make sure, or at least till my kids get in the house.
Jot that license plate down.
That's not a bad idea, too. Jennie couldn't accept the fire chief's determination that her children were cremated in the fire. She started experimenting by burning different animal bones to see if they could be burned to ash. Each time, she was left with a pile of charred bones. Jennie recalled that the remnants of their household appliances were found in the basement, burned, but not completely destroyed by the fire. A crematorium employee told her that human bones remain after bodies are burned for 2 hours at 2,000 degrees. The Sodder house burned for 45 minutes. Now, this is 1945. I don't think the majority of people had a lot of knowledge when it came to facts about true crime. I think a lot of people know now what it takes to completely burn a human body. It came up big in Making a Murderer.
Yeah.
It was a big component of that documentary. Cremation involves extremely high temperatures, high heat for a certain period of time.
Yeah, and you got 5 bodies we're talking about, too. Unless some type of accelerant was used or was inside the house. I don't know. It seems extreme to think that they couldn't find anything.
Well, no doubt, Gibbs, it's one of the big mysteries, right, in this case. A telephone repairman told the Sodders their lines were cut, not burned. According to the report, if the fire was electrical, they wouldn't have had any power, but the lights were still on downstairs right before the fire started. A witness came forward and claimed he saw a man at the house stealing a block and tackle used for removing car engines. So naturally, the Sodders wondered, did this man do something to George's trucks that night? Later, that same man pleaded guilty to stealing the block and tackle, but said that he didn't know anything about the fire. He also admitted to cutting wires to the house because he thought they were power lines. The telephone lines were cut 14 feet above the ground and 2 feet from the utility pole.
Okay, well, I can see why he might have thought that. And it's really strange that this all occurred on the night that the house went up in flames. I mean, I get it. He thought the phone lines were power lines, so he cut them. But for that to happen that night, so now you have no phone lines. And maybe when he was still in the block and tackle by the vehicle, maybe he did something to those too. I don't know. But it just seems really bizarre that this happened on the night that the house started on fire.
Well, in all the cases that we do, quite often we talk about coincidences, right? Could something be just a coincidence? Those happen. Those happen all the time. But, when you stack things on top of each other and you look at the timing and you look at all of these things, I think a lot of times it becomes harder and harder to think, yep, all of these things are just coincidental.
Yeah, I think you're right.
In March 1946, when Sylvia was visiting the memorial site, she found a hard rubber object in the yard. George said it was a napalm pineapple bomb used in wars. Jennie recalled hearing the thud and that rolling sound that night on the roof. She wondered if it could have been caused by this device.
That's an interesting thought, because we know the fire started shortly after that.
Well, it would make sense, right? If somebody threw something on the roof, there's the thud. And then this kind of oblong object rolling down the roof might make that exact sound.
Well, maybe what she heard was that, and maybe that was someone's first attempt at trying to start a fire that night.
Now that does make some sense. An unknown rider on the Alloy work bus, which passed the house just after midnight, reported that he saw balls of fire on the roof. So, if this witness is telling the truth, it means that the fire most likely started on the roof right after Jennie heard the noise on the roof. Then witnesses came forward to report seeing the Sodder children. One woman claimed she saw the kids looking out from a car during the fire. As reported and quoted in the Smithsonian magazine, A woman working at a tourist shop between Fayetteville and Charleston, about 50 miles away, said she saw the children on December 26th. She told the police that she served the kids breakfast. She said there was a car with Florida license plates at the tourist court too. A woman at a hotel in Charleston saw the children's photos in a paper and reported that she saw 4 of them the week after the fire. In her signed affidavit, she said the children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian descent. I don't remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the man appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning.
Well, now, so this is getting intriguing, right? Now you have witnesses saying they have seen the children in different areas, but they've seen the children. They're recounting what they saw that day.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when witnesses come forward later on and say, I saw someone, or I saw this, or I saw that. Now, in a lot of cases, especially unsolved, we find out that, okay, it turns out not to be true. A case of mistaken identity. People want to help out. They want to think that they saw this person or these individuals. The timing is odd, eerie, right? Yeah. On this, the number of children, because we don't have just one child.
Right.
This is 5 children. In one instance, the lady said she saw 4, but it's still a lot of kids.
And it's interesting that the adults that had these children were all Italian.
Well, it's interesting if you go back to the Mussolini talk and some of that stuff. And if she's correct, Gibbs, in saying, these adults didn't want me to talk to the kids. Okay, why not?
Right. What are you hiding?
What are you hiding? It makes it sound like, they don't want these kids to be seen, talk back to this woman. The Smithsonian Magazine reported that in 1947, George and Jennie sent a letter to the FBI asking for help. J. Edgar Hoover responded, "Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau." Hoover's agents said they would help if local authorities gave them permission, but the Fayetteville Police and Fire Department declined.
Why would they do that?
Well, I always find it disheartening when local agencies won't call in big time help. I don't get it. I will say I just watched that the J. Edgar Hoover movie with Leonardo DiCaprio the other day. I had seen it before. It's a pretty good movie. It really gives you kind of some good insight into him. He was a kind of a strange cat. But I do remember in one part of that movie, it was after the Lindbergh kidnapping. Hoover went before Congress, I think it was, and was asking them to extend his purview into kidnappings, which was a big deal, to essentially make kidnapping a federal crime. But I don't know what year that was. And I'm not sure it would have mattered here because I don't think there was any solid evidence that these children were kidnapped, right? There was no ransom note, no demand, nothing like that. We had some eyewitness sightings, but I don't know if that would have been enough.
And you had the fire chief saying they were cremated in the fire at the time.
And I think you put all that together, and that's probably why the FBI is saying, hey, we don't really have any purview, right, over this situation. At one point, Gibbs, George realized that he had never heard his children screaming for help. And I think in his mind, that cemented the idea that his children were not in the home during the fire. And the Sodders began to believe that their children may still be alive.
Yeah, you would think you would heard somebody screaming. I mean, I get that the smoke could have knocked them out,
overwhelmed them quickly. But 5 kids, fire breaks out. There's going to be a lot of screaming.
Yeah.
Is my thought. And to not hear anyone, not a single one of them scream, I think would be pretty odd.
And this is telling me that, George is reliving this every day, thinking about the events that night, and this pops up in his head. You know what? I don't ever remember hearing my kids scream.
Well, yeah, you and I talk about that all the time. I think this is a situation that would never be far from your mind. Is there something else I could have done? Are my kids really dead? Are they out there, as some of these witnesses claim? My thought is it would be all consuming.
Yeah.
So the Sodders believe that the kids could still be alive. They hired private investigator C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley learned that the insurance salesman who threatened George was a member of the coroner's jury that declared the fire accidental. So this was the guy who we said essentially threatened George and said that your kids are going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And come to find out, he was a member of the coroner's jury.
Seems like a conflict of interest.
Well, yeah, I think it is, but I doubt he relayed that interaction with anyone.
No.
A minister told Tinsley about a confession from Chief F.J. Morris. Morris had said no remains were found, but confessed to the minister that he found a heart among the ashes. He said he hid it in a dynamite box and buried it at the scene. Tinsley got Morris to show him the spot. They dug out the box and took it to the funeral director, who determined that the heart was actually a beef liver that somehow hadn't been burnt. I mean, this thing just keeps getting stranger and stranger. After this, the Sodders heard rumors that Morris told others he had not found the beef liver in the fire. He buried it there to give the family closure and stop the investigation, which makes the most sense of anything I've heard so far in this case.
Right.
Are you telling me that a beef liver is going to survive a fire, but yet the bones of 5 children are going to be completely cremated? Not going to happen.
But look, I found a heart. Must be one of the kids. I'm going to bury it in this box in the yard. You all stop your investigation. I'm sorry for your loss. But
here's the thing I don't understand. How does it give the family closure if he never told them about it?
And that's the strange thing, right? So
he just buried the box, but he didn't tell the family. I don't know about you folks, but I'm starting to get that spring fever. We are so close to feeling that soft grass under our feet. But before we can do that, we need to get our lawn back. Thankfully, Sunday gets your lawn growing. It helps to keep it healthy all season long. And with Sunday, you don't have to worry about the chemicals that you're using to keep your yard looking its best. Traditional lawn care lays down about 90 million pounds of pesticides each year. Well, Sunday is different. They're on a mission to change how people care for their yards. Sunday can help you grow a beautiful lawn without the guesswork or the nasty chemicals. All you have to do is visit getsunday.com, put in your address, and their lawn analysis tool does the rest. They then use soil and climate data to create a personal nutrient plan delivered to your door when you need it. Just attach the ready-to-use pouch to a garden hose and spray. It takes less than 15 minutes. And best of all, this stuff really works. And Sunday is offering our listeners 20% off. Full season plans start at just $129, and you can get 20% off at checkout when you visit getsunday.com/unsalt. That's 20% off your custom plan at getsunday.com/unsalt. You've heard me tout the benefits of CBD for a number of years now, but did you know there are other beneficial cannabinoids out there like CBN? CBN can give you an amazing night of sleep. My wife and I use both products, and we're now buying all of our stuff from jacbd.com. jacbd.com has all the things you need and more. They have delicious CBD gummies, which are great for calming the mind and reducing anxiety. They have nighttime gummies, which utilize CBN and melatonin to knock you out better than NyQuil or Benadryl ever could. They have some amazing tinctures that you can put in your morning coffee to reduce the jitters. Basically, they have everything. And you can save 20% off with the code CRIME at jacbd.com. Go to jacbd.com, just 5 letters, JACBD. Use promo code CRIME to save 20% off store-wide. Support Johnny Apple CBD and support the show.
How much is an hour of your time worth? Whether you're a realtor, lawyer, accountant, or even a content creator, Stamps.com gives you the ability to focus your time on what you do best, not on tedious mailing and shipping tasks. Print stamps, shipping labels, or certified mail forms in seconds. More than 4 million customers have relied on Stamps.com to make their lives easier. Go to Stamps.com/audio for a special offer. No contract, cancel anytime. That's Stamps.com/audio.
In 1947, George saw a picture in the paper of some children in New York City. He believed one of them was his daughter, Betty. He drove to find her, but the girl's parents refused to speak to him. And I get it, Gibbs. It would be strange to have someone show up at your door. But if you heard his story and you believed him in the slightest, I would think most people would want to kind of help a grieving father, at the very least prove that it's their daughter, it's not Betty, which I think would be pretty easy to do.
Unless it wasn't their daughter.
Exactly. Unless there's a reason that they didn't want to talk to him.
Right.
In August 1949, the Sodders hired pathologist Dr. Benwood Hunter to excavate their property. A pick and shovel crew excavated the basement on August 18th, 1949. They found damaged coins, a dictionary, and shards of bone. According to the Beckley Post-Herald, George made a statement to the press saying, "I'm still not convinced they are dead. Only 3 or 4 bones that may or may not be human were found, even though the men had dug to the very floor of the basement. The pathologist tells me if the children had been caught in the fire, at least their skulls should have remained." Dr. Hunter examined the bones and determined there were 4 vertebrae belonging to a 14 or 15-year-old child. He sent the bones to the Smithsonian Institution, and they gave the following report. The human bones consist of 4 lumbar vertebrae belonging to one individual. Since the transverse recesses are fused, the age of this individual at death should have been 16 or 17 years. The top limit of age should be about 22, since the centra, which normally fuse at 23, are still unfused. On this basis, the bones show greater skeletal maturation than one would expect for a 14-year-old boy. However, it is possible, though not probable, for a boy 14 and a half years old to show 16 to 17-year-old maturation. And this is important, Gibbs. I mean, the oldest missing Sodder child was 14 years old.
Yeah. So basically you're saying unlikely that these bones belong to a Sodder child.
Well, and I think to go even further, it was said that the vertebrae showed no evidence that they had been burned. The report said it's very strange that no other bones were found in the allegedly careful excavation of the basement of the house. One would expect to find the full skeletons of the 5 children rather than only 4 vertebrae. And that to me makes absolute sense.
It does.
I don't believe that the bodies would have been cremated completely. I just don't believe that. And I find it illogical that 4 vertebrae that is proved to have belonged to one person were the only bones that were found.
Yeah.
That makes absolutely no sense to me. They determined that the bones were most likely already in the dirt George used to create the memorial.
Now that makes sense.
It makes sense. It's also a little scary that wherever he got that dirt, there were 4 vertebrae from a human.
Sounds like another unsolved case.
It very well could be. The Smithsonian report led to 2 hearings at the Capitol in Charleston. Governor Oakey Patterson and State Police Superintendent W.E. Burchett told the Sodders their search was hopeless and they closed the case. Local authorities determined there was insufficient evidence to warrant a re-examination of the death's circumstances.
So everybody's shutting them down.
Yeah, it's kind of strange to me. They're getting this information that really makes it hard for a person to believe that, their children died in this fire.
Yeah.
But yet, every time they go to the authorities, it's as if the door is slammed in their face.
Basically, everybody wants to wash their hands of it.
That's what it seems like. On September 8th, 1949, Detective George Swain of Charleston announced that he was retiring from the case. George hired this guy and another detective, Frank Hill, to look for clues about the missing children. According to the Beckley Post-Herald, Swain said in a statement, "It has come to my attention that Mr. and Mrs. George Sodder of Fayetteville, the distressed parents of 5 children, who supposedly perished in a fire that destroyed the Sodder home, are to pursue investigation of the mysterious circumstances surrounding the tragic event. I therefore wish to inform the public that neither I nor any member of the American Detective Agency I represent are taking part in pursuing this matter further." So I said George hired him, but it doesn't sound like the guy actually took the case. Sounds like George tried to hire these 2 detectives and they turned him down. George and Jennie had a billboard put up on their property along Route 16. The project was completed in September 1953. The sign said, "What was the fate of our children? Kidnapped, murdered, or burned?" They passed out as many flyers as they could. The Sodders offered a $5,000 reward for information about any of the children. They eventually increased it to $10,000. And this billboard stood for almost 40 years.
So that's interesting, right? I mean, using the billboard back then.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it many, many times over the years, but I would think going back to the early 1950s, this has to have been one of the first times it was done that way.
Yeah.
I don't know that for a fact, but I'm thinking it was pretty early. And then, you think about a $5,000 reward, eventually up to $10,000. That is a lot of money.
That's big money back then.
And then to have a billboard stand for 40 years with the same sign on it.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing if you think about it. After putting up the billboard, the Sodders got a letter from a woman in St. Louis who said that Martha was in a convent. A tip from Texas came from a person who heard people talking in a bar about a fire on Christmas Eve in West Virginia. Another person from Florida reported that the children were living with one of Jennie's distant relatives. A missionary in Cortez, Florida, saw a picture of the children in a paper and reported that he saw them at a home in Cortez. A Florida investigator said that the children had been there, but they were gone. So really, Gibbs, there's no way to know the validity of any of these tips. We mentioned it. It's quite a bit of money, right? $5,000, $10,000. You're going to get tips all over when people learn that there's quite a bit of money to be had.
Yeah. We did hear earlier on that somebody thought they saw the children in Florida, so maybe Florida was a possibility.
Could be. The Smithsonian Magazine reported that George traveled all over the country to follow up on these tips, but never found his children. He said in a 1967 interview, "Time is running out for us, but we only want to know. If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them." It was also reported that George always felt frustrated by the lack of interest from authorities in the case. And that's something I can definitely see, because I have felt it as well. It just seems like at every turn, authorities weren't really all that into trying to figure out what happened.
It just seems like they felt like George and Jennie just needed to let it go.
But then you have to ask the question, why did they feel that way? Why not take the FBI up on their offer to come in and assist? I'm not pointing the finger at anybody, but you have to ask the question. Was there an ulterior motive? Was there a reason why the authorities just kind of wanted this to be over and done.
Because it actually benefits the police department by using the FBI. It takes the pressure off of them saying, hey, even the FBI agrees with our findings.
Assuming they agree.
Exactly.
Now, if they come in and they find something damaging, and conspiracy theorists would look at it and say, well, of course, that's why they didn't want the FBI to come in. They didn't want the FBI to uncover something. In 1968, Jennie found a letter in the mail addressed to her. The letter was sent from Kentucky, but had no return address. Inside, she found a photo of a young man who appeared to be in his 20s. On the back of the picture was a note. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Lil Boys, A90132 or 35. Jennie noticed that the young man did resemble Louis Sodder, who was just 9 years old when he disappeared. So another thing that is very interesting happening in this case, there's a couple of things that stood out to me. One are the numbers. What do you make of those numbers? Even, what was written on the back of the note. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Lil Boys. Okay. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me other than the name Louis Sodder. The other thing, Louis was 9 in 1945. This is 23 years later. And the boy in the photo, or the young man, was said to look like he was in his 20s. Well, Louis Sodder would be in his mid-30s.
True.
At that point. Not to say that, it couldn't have been him in the picture, but the ages don't quite match up. The Sodders hired a private investigator and sent him to Kentucky to investigate, but they never heard from him again.
Which is bizarre.
Very bizarre. Or is it, hey, I'm taking your money and I was planning on leaving anyway. So Jennie chose to keep the letter private so no harm would come to Louis, but they did add the new picture to the billboard. George Sodder died on August 16th, 1969. Jennie had the billboard updated in May 1976. The new sign stated, after 30 years, it's not too late to investigate. On Christmas Eve, 1945, our home was set afire and 5 of our children, ages 5 through 14, kidnapped. The officials blamed defective wiring. Although lights were still burning after the fire started, the official report stated that the children died in the fire. However, no bones were found in the residue, and there was no smell of burning flesh during or after the fire. What was the motive of the law officers involved? What did they have to gain by making us suffer all these years of injustice? Why did they lie and force us to accept those lies? So pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. To put that out on the billboard for everybody to see.
Reminds me a little bit of the 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri.
It does.
A little bit. But I don't think there's any doubt, Gibbs, about, where her true feelings lie. She is extremely mistrustful of the police. And that probably is not a strong enough word. She's basically saying that they covered this whole thing up. They lied. And she's asking the question, what did they have to gain? Why would they do it?
Yeah.
What was in it for them? Jennie lived alone until her death on February 15th, 1989. She wore all black every day to mourn her children. Eventually, after her death, the billboard was torn down. And we touch on it quite a bit, but I think this really hammers it home. She died 44 years after the fire. 44 years of wearing black every day, mourning your children every day. That really kind of drives it home.
It really does.
The toll that, these types of things take on grieving families. It's brutal. Not to mention the fact that she had children who survived.
Yeah, she had 5 other kids.
Yeah, so she had to grieve. She had to take care of them as well. I mean, at least one of them was out by that time. But after her death, the Sodder children and even their children continued investigating. They came up with their own theories about what happened. Some believe that the mafia tried to recruit George and he refused. or they tried to extort money from him and he refused to pay. Others believe the children were kidnapped by someone they knew. This person ran inside, told them the house was on fire, and offered to take them somewhere safe. The door was unlocked at some point. We talked about it, right? Jennie saw it unlocked. So it is possible someone could have snuck inside. If the children lived, maybe they never contacted their parents because they thought that was the best way to protect them. A pathologist who requested not to be identified told the Beckley Post-Herald in 1960, no ordinary house fire could completely consume 5 bodies. Dr. Golf Lilly, a county coroner, said, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's highly improbable. I have seen about 120 burning deaths, and there were always some remains left. And we mentioned the 15-year anniversary article in the Beckley Post-Herald. It reported that the death certificates were not signed by a physician, coroner, or a justice of the peace. An undertaker who has since died signed them. Carl Vickers, prosecutor at the time of the inquest, does not believe authorities completed any medical investigation.
That's a lot of information right there.
Yeah, and I think some of it kind of backs up what you and I were thinking. If you think about a house fire, I just don't see it completely consuming 5 bodies. Completely. Now, one county coroner did say it's not impossible, but highly improbable. And, that's a statement that resonates with me because I do think it's very tough to say that things are impossible.
Sure.
You and I talk about it a lot. Is it probable? Is it very likely? I think the answer is no.
But for that same coroner to say he investigated 120 deaths by burning and has always found some type of remains,
that makes it highly improbable.
Yeah.
That person just didn't want to come out and say impossible. And I understand that because I don't like to deal in those type of absolutes either. Sylvia Sodder Paxton was the last surviving Sodder child. She never believed her siblings died in a fire. Sylvia died on April 21st, 2021, after suffering from an illness. She was 79 years old. A white house now sits on the Sodders' old property. Gibbs, as we wrap up this case, it's a very strange one. Sad, strange, bizarre. I mean, there's a lot of adjectives you could use. Rumors and speculations have always been more prevalent in this case than actual real facts. There are very little in the way of facts in this case. Now, part of that might be because it was 1945.
Sure.
Part of that might be because, as some people have suggested, the authorities didn't do a whole hell of a lot in the way of investigation. It was kind of just like, yep, they burned up in the fire. There's nothing else we can do.
Sorry about your loss.
Yeah.
Move on.
Let's all move on. Well, the Sodders didn't want to move on, but many, many people, including a lot of experts, do not believe the children could have been fully cremated in the fire. The strange circumstances surrounding the fire. We talked about the phone call, the threats from the life insurance agent and the stranger, the missing ladder, the defective trucks, all of that. When you put it all together, it leads a lot of people to believe that this was no accident. There was something bigger going on. This was coordinated. But it is very sad when you think about George and Jennie dying without ever knowing what happened to their children, and then the rest of the Sodder children since passing away, never knowing what really happened to their siblings.
Always wondering.
Well, unlike many unsolved cases that we do, because this one dates back so far, I would say it's pretty unlikely that the Sodder children's disappearance is a case that will ever be solved. I mean, virtually everybody involved is now dead, whether that's law enforcement, the family, someone who might have been a perpetrator. They're not going to be alive at this point in time.
Now, maybe the youngest that was 9 at the time that supposedly died in the fire. But if he didn't die in the fire, maybe he comes forward and says, you know what? We were kidnapped.
And this is what really happened. Yeah, I did it in my head, the math. I think he'd be around 76 or so, if my math is correct.
If he didn't die in the fire and still is alive today.
Yeah. But I do think it's, unlike many unsolved cases, I think the chances of the real truth ever coming out are pretty slim.
Yeah.
But again, we never say impossible. It could happen. But that's it, Gibbs, for our episode on the unsolved Sodder children. I will say it is one that leaves me scratching my head quite a bit. So many strange things, leading up to the fire, after the fire. I will say that to me, kind of the central point of this case is, could these bodies have completely burned up in this fire? And I think you have to lean towards, no, they couldn't have, or they wouldn't have, most likely. You've got experts saying that. Most people have said that. So it just adds to the mystery.
Yeah, I wish that they had the tools they have today back then. And I think they probably could have determined more things at the burn site.
Oh, there's no doubt. Yeah, if they had some of the technology that they had today. We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hey, T-Cat, it's Stephanie from New Jersey. I'm all caught up on binging the true crime all the time, but I am moving over to Unsolved and Criminology, so I'm excited about that. I do have a case suggestion, but it's for T-Cat Unsolved, and it's out of New Jersey. It's the Eastbound Strangler case, and he's believed to be responsible for the murders of at least 4 women near Atlantic City. This was back in 2006. But what makes this case interesting is that all the 4 victims were discovered strangled and face down in a ditch lined up in a row. They were approximately 60 feet apart from one another. The killer still remains unidentified, and there is a $25,000 reward still out there, and it has been unclaimed. So I just thought that was very interesting, and anything out of New Jersey is, interesting for me. But anyway, I am team for Gibby. I can't have one without the other. But keep doing what you're doing and stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Yeah, that's a great case. I know we covered that. I don't remember what episode that was on T-Cat Unsolved.
So I had to look it up real quick, Gibbs, while you were talking. It's actually episode 217. And I get it. She says she hasn't listened to Unsolved. And even if she looked it up, she probably wouldn't have found it, because we didn't call it the Eastbound Strangler. We called it the Atlantic City 4.
Yes.
But it is a good episode. Very mysterious. So, and this voicemail will be like a little Easter egg by the time she gets to catching up on Unsolved.
She'll be like, oh, there it is.
Hi, this is Tasha from Eastern Connecticut, your friendly postal carrier. I was calling because I was listening to the Watcher of Westfield episode, and you were discussing double spacing after a period. I was born in 93, and growing up, when we learned typing in school, they still told us to double space after a period. I personally no longer use this, but it was something that was taught to us in high school. Just wanted to throw in my 2 cents there. Have a great day.
So it's funny, Gibbs, what people latch onto. We've received a lot of correspondence about that. I know I was taught that.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I used it for quite a long time. I don't know, probably in the business world at some point, I latched on to the fact that it was kind of no longer done that way. I don't know why we have to change things that work.
If
it works, it works.
Yeah, somebody came along and thought, this will work better.
Yeah, and maybe it does. But it always interests me what people kind of latch onto, and I think it's things that take them back in time.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like something like this would. And so, but we appreciate when people reach out. Love it.
We do.
Hey, fellas. This is Bobby from Tennessee. Just wanted to say, first off, excellent shows. I've been binge listening the last few months, and they get me through my days. So thank you. Appreciate it. I had a couple ideas for for some shows. One was a solved case, one was unsolved, and both of these victims I went to school with. One was a little boy named Travis Shane King. He was abducted and murdered, and they actually found the fellow that done that. And the other was this girl I went to school with, her and her sister. Her name was Tammy Salyer, and she was shot on Interstate 81 heading home from work after closing down a local Burger King, and it was never solved. So anyways, like I said, excellent show. Appreciate it. Keep your own time ticking.
All right. Appreciate the voicemail, and there's some great cases for us to check out.
Yeah, can't wait to look into those.
All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Stream the biggest movies and TV shows for free on Pluto TV. Watch movies like Titanic and G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, plus TV shows like CSI and Star Trek: The Next Generation. Starting this month, check out the 24/7 Stargate channel exclusively on Pluto TV. Plus hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows absolutely free. Download the free Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start watching today.